Hi, guys. Hope all is well with you and that you're enjoying your weekend. I will see you on Monday for the next live Zoom class, but right now I'm going to be going over the fourth commandment. And the next section that you're responsible for, as well as the questions that you're responsible for in your Unit 7 questions for this section. So, quick recap of what you should be looking at in both your notes and in your textbook on pages 193 to 198. Um, the fourth commandment is primarily concerned with the relationship between children and parents, right? However, that's not all that it's concerned with. Okay, so that is what we would call the micro view, but it also takes a macro view in terms of how we as human beings, we as Christians in particular, are called to respond to all legitimate authority. And guess what, folks? Your parents are a legitimate authority in your life, right? So, put another way, it likewise concerns the ties of kinship between members of the extended family and includes and presupposes the duties of parents, instructors, teachers, leaders, magistrates, those who govern, all who exercise authority over others or over a community of persons. At least that is how our Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 2199, would kind of extend the fourth commandment to the micro view. Um, Historically, right, the fourth commandment was intended to remind adult children of their responsibility to take care of their aging parents. More specifically, when this commandment was introduced by Moses to the people of Israel, the Middle East was very much a nomadic kind of tribal system, if you will. Not tribal system, but there were basically people either lived in small communities or cities, or they moved from place to place. And with that, people would often, the nomadic people, like leave elderly people by the wayside because they slowed them down and kept them from getting where they need to be. So really, this was a commandment written in the reality that we shouldn't commit euthanasia. So while we mostly think of euthanasia as like a fifth commandment violation, it really has its roots here in the fourth commandment as well. When we look at the fourth commandment, we have to understand what the term authority means. Authority comes from the Latin root for the word author or creator, right? And if we pay attention to the original meaning of a word in the belief that it will guide us, we can begin to think the authority held by our parents, right? How are they the authors, right? The authority, the authors, creators of our lives, and it becomes pretty self-explanatory. That is one of the reasons they will always have, in some way, shape, or form, or that we should always have, in some way, shape, or form, respect toward them, love towards them, even, yes, obedience toward them, although that can sometimes that diminishes a bit over time. Not that we shouldn't obey them, but that we as moral actors, human beings who are able to make moral judgments and are fine-tuning our morality over time, can use moral discretion as far as that goes. And that also translates from this micro view that we're talking about into the macro view again. The fourth commandment certainly at its core promotes family values. The family is described as the domestic church by Pope St. John Paul II. And that family, right, mirrors the love and community of the triune God of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Mother, father, children, right? So when we look at the fourth commandment, it is really talking about the rightful authority of parents as our creators, as the means to which God, the ultimate creator, allowed for our creation. So out of justice, we owe them everything, and it's a debt that we can never repay, which is why we always are going to owe them honor, respect, love, and yes, obedience. Okay. So again, transitioning into the micro view from the micro view into the macro view, The fourth commandment is also concerned with relationships in other social groups. And as we have talked about several times in class already, we are involved in many different communities, many different social groups. Um, and there are certain duties and responsibilities that are exercised in relationships in those communities, in those societies, right? Involved in every single one of those relationships is honor, right? Respect, admiration, recognition of another's inherent dignity as a human person. And there are various ways in which the honor is expressed, right? So, without getting into too much detail, which is what you should be reading for, we can look then to the application of this commandment in our own lives, in our relationships with our parents, but also in, again, that macro view, in the areas of our citizenship. So our parents are put in positions of authority over us by God, but so too are governmental officials. Now, the difference between our parents and governmental officials is simply this. While we will always owe love, honor, respect, and obedience to our parents because of who they are, right? Although there is a kind of reality that we need to face. Sometimes we have not so good parents, right? And I think we can all kind of recognize that reality. We are not, as moral actors, required to obey immoral commands, right? And the same holds true for the authority that governments hold over us. So as moral actors, we need to practice moral discernment, moral judgment, and determine if laws are morally just or not. And if they are not just, well, we're not required to follow them, morally speaking. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind as we move forward. So when we look at the fourth commandment, it's talking about that. Another part of the fourth commandment, which we sometimes overlook, I mean, I talked about this in the last video, at the root of this, at the core of this commandment is respect for life. Prejudice, right, is a violation of the fourth commandment. It is failing to respect other people, based on color of skin, based on ethnicity, based on something else, right? Prejudging a person based on a difference that you perceive, which might not actually exist. So, believe it or not, the fourth commandment is violated, by prejudice, which is what the story on page 197 in your textbook is talking about. So, let's very quickly go over your questions. Your 6 questions that you're responsible for are, first, what is the fourth commandment? What are some values the commandment emphasizes? Second, what are some duties children, let me just read it for you. Children owe parents. What are some rights of children? Third, what do parents owe their children? What do siblings owe each other? Right? Fourth, what are some things government authorities owe citizens? That's important. Fifth, what are some of our obligations as citizens? Again, it's kind of the converse. Duties, responsibilities, right? Rights and responsibilities, how they correspond to each other. We have certain rights that carry with it certain responsibilities. Governments have responsibilities to us in turn. Let me just kind of take a quick aside here for a second. One of the main obligations to kind of determine whether or not a government is acting with legitimate authority is making sure that they do 2 things, right? When they're passing laws, those laws have to be concerned and always put the individuals, right, human beings first. So laws are written for humans, and they're written for the common good. So those 2 things need to be present for a law to be licit, along with all the other moral components that we're going to continue to talk about as we talk about the 10 Commandments. Okay. And the 6th question, how is prejudice a violation of the principles of the 4th commandment? Okay, so the first question, what is the 4th commandment? What are some values that commandment emphasizes? The 4th commandment is honor your father and your mother. It is a positive commandment. It's asking you to do something, right? So it's a positive commandment. It actually carries with it a blessing, right? What happens if you honor your father and your mother? In both Exodus and Deuteronomy, it kind of gives you the blessings will be given upon you in the land of your father and mother for the rest of your days if you honor your father and mother, right? So there's it's a positive commandment that has blessings attached to your fulfillment of it. Okay, so 4th commandment, honor your father and your mother. What are the values that it emphasizes, right? It encourages children to obey and respect their parents, right? To love them, obey them. Promotes family values as well as respect for the rightful authority in our society. The second question, what are some duties children owe parents? What are some rights of children? First and foremost, children should obey the just, right, moral direction of their parents and seek their advice and show support and gratitude to their parents. Children, on the other hand, have the basic right to choose their own vocation and career, right? So your parents can certainly suggest, but ultimately you, being a moral agent that has free will, should be the one that chooses what you do and where you're going in life, right? And most importantly, you as your parent's child, as a gift to them from God, are to be treated with love, respect, and dignity, right? So parents owe you that as part of their parental responsibility, to treat you with love, respect, and dignity. You'll notice it's a two-way street. You're called to treat them that way. They're called to treat you that way. And it starts there, right? That because this is the closest relationship that you have as children, right, to your parents, and generates outward from there to the other people, neighbors that you encounter throughout your life. The third question, what do parents owe their children? What do siblings owe each other? Parents must honor their children as, I said, a precious image, precious gift of God. They must educate them, right, morally, intellectually, and socially in the safe and caring environment that they provide. But the biggest, of course, is that one that I mentioned, the moral component. They're expected to lead their children to Christ, and children as siblings owe each other patience. I know this is something that is very applicable to the world we're living in right now. And those of you that are surrounded by your siblings, whether the ones that are fresh from college or not so fresh from college for the last couple of weeks, or younger siblings that are living with you, you are to practice patience, tolerance, fairness, and love with them. Easier said than done right now, but it is the call that we all have. Even at 42, I still try and be patient, tolerant, fair, and loving to both my brothers and my sister. It is not easy, but the more that I allow God to work with me and through me, the easier it is. Okay? Question number 4. What are some things government authorities owe citizens? At their core, as I said earlier, they have to uphold basic human and political rights, the rights of the individual, right? They need to exercise their authority in service to the individual and to a just society, or in other words, to the common good. So those two things. Their main goal, the main goal of a government, is always to see to the needs of the individual. Something I think we often overlook, and I think this is endemic of the year 2020 that we live in. Governments work for the individual. The individual does not work for the government, right? The purpose of a government is always to care for and protect the rights of the individual and the good of society. And I think we have lost sight of that in some situations, in some sense. And it's important we go back to that reality and understanding that governments exist solely to protect the needs of the individual and the common good. Number 5 asks us, what are some of our obligations as citizens? The main kind of one is that as citizens we're called to obey legitimate, just regulations of those in authority. Obey laws that are just. Things that help promote the common good, things that build up the virtue of solidarity, that is recognition of every person that you encounter as your brother or sister. Things that promote the dignity of human being by doing things like paying taxes, voting, coming to other people's aid. Those are all things that we can and should do as citizens. Okay? And the last question, how is prejudice a violation of the principles of the fourth commandment? What do you do when you're being prejudiced? You are looking at someone as less than, right? Less than what they are. And of course, that leads to the basic denial of human rights against individuals or a group of people who happen to have that same characteristic that you think of as less than. Okay? So that's it. Have a good weekend again. See you guys on Monday. If you have any questions about any of this stuff, I will be happy to go over it with you. And I'll see you then. Bye.